welcome to reform thinking. So I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine you are sitting at home, watching the evening news,
Right.
and you see footage of a nation that is currently fighting for its physical survival, against a massive military invasion.
Yeah, a total war for existence.
But the headline flashing across the bottom of the screen, it isn't about tanks. It is not about artillery or front lines. It says the parliament of this nation just passed a law banning a specific church hierarchy from operating within its borders.
Which is a pretty shocking thing to see on a news sticker.
It really is. And, what is your immediate reaction when you see that? Do you see a justified, necessary defense of a nation's existence against an internal security threat? Or, do you see a terrifying overstep by the state, something that just crushes religious freedom and violates the conscience of peaceful worshipers?
That tension right there, that is one of the most difficult dilemmas a modern democracy can face. Because on one side of the ledger, you have a government that absolutely must not persecute peaceful believers. But on the other side, that same government, they cannot just turn a blind eye to a vast, highly organized administrative network that might be, actively assisting the very army bombing its cities.
So for this deep dive, we're going to analyze the explosive religious and legal crisis happening right now in Ukraine, specifically surrounding the Moscow Patriarchate.
Yeah, and we have some really solid source material to help us unpack this today.
We do. We have two highly detailed analytical essays. One looks at the civil and national security dimensions of religious liberty. The other provides a really rigorous scriptural and theological analysis of the state's authority.
Which is so crucial because you cannot just look at this purely as a political issue.
Right. The goal here is to figure out how a nation untangles a centuries-old fusion of church and state without, destroying the sanctuary of the human conscience in the process.
So we should probably start by looking at the concrete legal reality that triggered this whole global debate.
Let's do that. So in August 2024, the Verkhovna Rada, which is Ukraine's parliament-adopted law num 3894-9X.
And then President Volodymyr Zelensky signed it on August 24, which that is Ukraine's Independence Day.
That is not a coincidence.
Oh, not at all. The timing of that signature is highly significant. It frames the law as a matter of national sovereignty.
Right, it is a statement.
Yeah. The legislation is formally titled The Law on the Protection of the Constitutional Order in the Field of Activities of Religious Organizations.
That is a mouthful.
It is. But the specific stated target of this legislation is the Russian Orthodox Church. The law prohibits it from operating in Ukraine.
Okay, so it targets the Russian Orthodox Church directly.
Yes. And it also creates a legal mechanism targeting any Ukrainian religious organizations that are found to be affiliated with the Russian Orthodox Church, or really affiliated with any religious centers located in aggressor states.
Wait, I need to stop you there, because we have to clear up a massive misconception.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Yeah. If you spend any time on social media, you have probably seen viral posts or even statements from political commentators claiming that Ukraine, quote-unquote, banned Christianity.
Which is just wildly inaccurate.
I have a Reuters fact check right here in our source material that says that is completely false. So what is actually happening on the ground?
The claim that Ukraine banned Christianity is a complete fabrication. I mean, Ukraine is a country with very active, massive Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, and Muslim communities.
Right. It is a very pluralistic society in that regard.
Yeah, and the government's own explanatory note attached to the law makes a very clear distinction. The state claims it is not attempting to regulate theology.
Okay.
It is not regulating the language of the church service, the church calendar, or any liturgical practice at all.
So they do not care how you pray or what language you use to read the Bible.
Right. The state demands a legal withdrawal from a specific administrative hierarchy that is located in a hostile foreign capital.
How does that actually work in practice, though? If, let's say, a local church in Kyiv is accused of having these ties, do the police just show up and padlock the doors the next morning?
No. The law creates a very structured process. It designates a specific government body called the State Service of Ukraine for Ethnic Policy and Freedom of Conscience.
Okay.
People usually just refer to it by the acronym DSS. DS is tasked with investigating these structural links.
So they do the auditing, basically.
Yeah. If DSS conducts an investigation and finds that a religious organization in Ukraine is affiliated with the Moscow Patriarchate, they notify that local organization.
And then what?
The organization is then given 9 months to sever those ties legally and administratively.
9 months. That is a decent chunk of time.
It is, and only after that 9-month period, if the ties remain, can DSS ask a judge to terminate the legal status of that specific entity.
Let me try to wrap my head around this with a secular analogy. Think about a massive corporate franchise.
Okay, I am with you.
Imagine a global corporate headquarters goes completely rogue and starts funding illicit, dangerous, highly illegal activities. Now you have a local franchise of that corporation operating in another country.
Right, like a local fast food spot or something.
Yeah. And the people working there are just normal folks. But the host country looks at the situation and says, you cannot keep the branding, the corporate structure, and the financial ties to that rogue headquarters. You have to break off.
That is a really good way to look at it.
But the question is, how does a government separate the local peaceful franchise employees, or in this case, the everyday worshipers in the pews, from a hostile foreign board of directors without punishing the innocent?
And that is the defining question for the Ukrainian state. The government's argument is that a local entity cannot maintain structural subjection to a foreign center that is, actively trying to destroy the entire country.
That makes sense from a national security standpoint.
It does. But to understand why this specific headquarters, the Moscow Patriarchate, triggers such a massive existential security alarms, we really have to look backward.
Because this isn't a new problem that just started in 2022.
No, not at all. The sources describe a historical engine of state and church fusion that goes back centuries. Our sources talk about a Byzantine concept called symphonia.
Okay, I am not a historian of the Byzantine Empire. What does that term mean, and how did it set the stage for what is happening today?
So symphonia was the ancient Byzantine ideal of a harmonious co-equality between the emperor and the patriarch, like between the throne and the altar.
The two powers working together.
Right. The theory was that the state and the church were two pillars holding up the same Christian society, operating side by side. The emperor handled the physical realm, and the patriarch handled the spiritual realm.
I mean, that sounds somewhat balanced in theory.
In theory, yes. But in practice, symphonia almost always degraded into complete state supremacy over the church.
Because the state has the weapons.
Yeah. The emperor usually had the military, and the military dictates terms. So when the center of Eastern Orthodoxy shifted geographically toward Russia, this concept mutated into a very aggressive form of religious imperialism.
So the church basically became an instrument of the empire.
Yes. And the sources specifically mention Peter the Great in the year 1721.
Oh, right.
He didn't just influence the church, he completely abolished the patriarchate altogether.
Wait, how does a secular ruler just delete the head of a massive church?
By absolute decree. I mean, Peter the Great wanted to modernize and control every single aspect of Russian society. He viewed a separate church hierarchy as a threat to his absolute authority.
So he just got rid of it.
Yeah, he abolished the role of the patriarch and replaced it with something called the Holy Governing Synod.
What is that? It sounds like a church council.
It sounds like one, but it was essentially a secular government department. It was overseen by a secular bureaucrat who was directly appointed by the Tsar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for centuries under the Russian Tsars, priests effectively functioned as civil servants.
Wait, function as civil servants? You mean the state was literally paying them to act like government employees?
Yes. And it went much, much further than that. The confessional was often utilized as an apparatus for state intelligence.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah. If a parishioner confessed to harboring rebellious thoughts against the Tsar, the priest was expected, and often legally required, to report that to the authorities.
That is horrifying.
The church was fully consolidated into the autocratic state machine. It was a tool of social control.
And this is where the timeline gets fascinating to me. Because you would think the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, with its militant, aggressive atheism, would have just ended that dynamic forever.
You would think so, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Soviet state spent decades executing priests, blowing up cathedrals, and trying to eradicate religion completely. But then we get to 1943.
The turning point.
Right. Joseph Stalin is facing the existential threat of the Second World War, and he decides to bring the church back. I have to push back here, though. Stalin hated religion. He was a committed Marxist who viewed religion as the opiate of the masses. Why on earth would he resurrect the very institution he tried to destroy?
Because Stalin was a pragmatist facing total annihilation by Nazi Germany. He needed every possible tool to mobilize the Russian population for the war effort. to boost morale and to appeal to intense Russian patriotism.
So he used religion as a tool.
Yes. He realized he could not motivate the country purely with communist ideology, so he resurrected the defunct Patriarchate. But, and this is key, he did not bring it back as a free, independent religious body.
Of course not. It's Stalin.
Right. He rebuilt it as a highly managed, co-opted organ of state security. The modern Moscow Patriarchate was systematically infiltrated and controlled by the KGB.
The sources note that key figures within the church hierarchy were trained and deployed as actual intelligence assets to advance Soviet foreign policy globally.
Yes. The KGB used church delegations traveling abroad to spread Soviet propaganda and gather intelligence.
That is wild.
And this brings us to a really crucial detail from the source material. It notes that the current head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, operated under the KGB codename Mikhailov during the Soviet era.
So the man currently leading the church was a registered intelligence asset.
Yes, according to the historical records cited in the sources.
And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, that partnership between the intelligence services and the church didn't just dissolve. It seems it just renewed itself and adapted under Vladimir Putin.
It absolutely did. And this brings us to a theological political hybrid that our sources call the Ruski Mir, or the Russian world ideology.
Can you break down what that is? Because it sounds like it is totally central to the current conflict.
Ruski Mir is a highly manufactured ideology. It asserts a mystical spiritual unity between Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus.
Okay.
It claims these three nations form a single, indivisible spiritual space, all under Moscow's hegemony.
So in this worldview, a sovereign, independent Ukraine isn't just a political problem for Moscow. It is actually viewed as a spiritual heresy.
That is the core of it. In the Ruski Mir imagination, Ukraine is not viewed as a distinct sovereign nation with its own culture and language.
Wow.
It is treated as a rebellious, confused province of a wider Russian spiritual civilization that has strayed from its true path and just must be forced back into the fold.
That is terrifying.
Yeah, and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe PACE, they even issued a resolution explicitly stating that the Moscow Patriarchate has championed this ideology to portray the invasion of Ukraine as a holy war.
And Patriarch Kirill's own rhetoric is staggering. I mean, he has publicly stated from the pulpit that Russian soldiers who die in the invasion of Ukraine are cleansed of all their sins.
Yeah, he really said that.
Our theological source material points out that this is a total blasphemous distortion of the doctrine of substitutionary atonement.
We should probably define that theological term for clarity, just so everyone is on the same page.
Yeah, please do.
Substitutionary atonement is the core Christian doctrine that Jesus Christ died on the cross as a substitute for sinners, taking the penalty for their sins, and that forgiveness comes solely through faith in his sacrifice.
So Kirill is taking the saving work of Christ and applying it to imperial conquest.
Essentially, yes.
He is telling soldiers, if you go die while attacking a neighboring country, that act of military aggression will wash away your sins.
And when a church hierarchy blesses an invasion as holy and promises spiritual absolution for military conquest, it crosses a massive line.
Yeah, it completely leaves the realm of Christianity.
It moves from providing pastoral care into functioning as a theological architect for military aggression. It weaponizes the vocabulary of the gospel for the sake of the state.
Think about the implications of that for a second. If an institution has functioned as a department of the state for centuries, acting as an intelligence asset and providing theological cover for a war of aggression, at what point does it cease being a traditional church and mutate into an intelligence agency wearing religious robes?
That is the precise dilemma facing the Ukrainian legislature right now. They're looking at an institution that claims the protections of religious liberty, but operates like a hostile state agency.
It is unprecedented.
It is. And this historical reality forces a massive collision with biblical doctrines regarding the proper limits of civil authority. To untangle this, the source material brings in a strict scriptural framework, looking at a clash of two very distinct visions found in the New Testament.
Let's analyze the first part of that theological framework. Our source material heavily relies on Romans chapter 13 to establish the legitimate, God-ordained role of government.
Yes.
Paul writes that the civil magistrate bears the sword for public justice. Walk us through the exegesis provided in the text.
So the text analyzes how Paul structures this passage around a very clear logical argument. He commands believers to submit to the governing authorities, and he grounds that command in the fact that civil government is a common grace institution ordained by God to restrain sin.
Let's define common grace institution for someone who might not be familiar with Reformed theology.
Sure. Common grace refers to the unmerited favor God gives to all people, regardless of whether they are believers or not.
Okay.
It includes things like rain, sunshine, human intellect, and societal order. Civil government is a common grace institution because God instituted it to maintain basic justice and prevent society from collapsing into total anarchy, which benefits everyone.
That makes perfect sense.
And the text analyzes the specific Greek words Paul uses to describe this authority. He calls the magistrate a diakonos.
A diakonos, that translates to a servant, right? Like where we do the word deacon.
Yes, exactly. Well, not exactly, but you get the point. It means a household servant.
So the magistrate is a household servant to God. Not an autonomous king who can just invent his own morality and do whatever he wants, but a delegated authority who answers to a higher judge.
You hit the nail on the head. The magistrate is strictly accountable to God for how they execute justice. Furthermore, Paul says the magistrate beareth not the sword in vain.
Right.
The source text points out something fascinating about the Greek word used for sword here. The word is machada.
What is the significance of machera compared to other words for sword?
So, machera refers to the short Roman sword or a military dagger. It was utilized for internal police action, judicial authority, and maintaining public order within the state.
Okay, so it is a specific tool for a specific job.
Yeah, it was the weapon a local guard would carry. The author contrasts this with another Greek word, the rhomphaia, which was a massive, heavy broadsword associated with large-scale military invasions or apocalyptic cosmic judgment.
So by utilizing machera, Paul specifies that the state holds executive police authority to maintain internal civil peace and punish actual, tangible crimes.
Yes.
They hold the short sword of police action, not the broadsword of cosmic spiritual judgment.
Correct. The historical context of Romans 13 adds massive weight to this, too.
How so?
Paul is writing to Christians living in the city of Rome under the Emperor Nero. Now, there were strong zealot revolutionary temptations among the Jewish believers at that time.
I can imagine. It must have been infuriating for Jewish believers to be told they had to acknowledge any pagan oppressive ruler. The Zealots believed that acknowledging a Roman Caesar was outright treason against God.
And Paul aimed to thoroughly dismantle that revolutionary temptation. He was showing the Roman Christians that Christianity is a spiritual kingdom.
Right.
Believers are commanded to submit to the common grace civil order, which theologians call the forum externum.
Forum externum, the external forum.
Yes, it refers to the external conduct of human beings as citizens. Do you pay your taxes? Do you steal? Do you commit violence? The state has legitimate authority over this external sphere.
But it stops there.
It does. It does not, however, have any authority over the forum internum, the internal conscience, the spiritual government of the church, or Christian doctrine.
Holding that short sword of justice is a terrifying responsibility. I mean, if the state's authority is limited strictly to the external conduct of citizens, how does it prosecute a religious leader without accidentally trying to police their internal soul?
That is the line they have to walk.
Right. For example, if a priest is sitting in a parish in eastern Ukraine and passing artillery coordinates to Russian forces, the state obviously has to step in. But how do they do that without becoming the theology police?
The state must focus exclusively on the external actions. Treason, storing weapons, and espionage are civil crimes. They exist entirely in the forum externum.
So they prosecute the action, not the thought.
The state prosecutes the external crime, not the internal belief. A judge should never ask a priest about their view of the Trinity, but the judge absolutely must ask if the priest was hiding munitions in the church basement.
That makes the boundary very clear.
It does. However, the danger of the state overstepping its bounds and swinging the broadsword into the spiritual realm is real. And this is where our source material shifts to the second scriptural lens, offering a counter-warning about what happens when the church itself becomes the aggressor.
Yeah, the analysis moves from Romans 13 to the apocalyptic warnings of Revelation 13. The text examines the vision of the second beast rising from the earth.
This part is so fascinating.
I know the book of Revelation can be incredibly difficult to interpret.
Yeah.
How does the source text apply this vision to statecraft?
The text focuses on the stark visual contradiction of this second beast. It has two horns like a lamb, which is obviously designed to mimic Christ, but it speaks with the voice of a dragon.
A deceptive appearance.
Yeah. And the source notes a specific linguistic detail. The Greek word arnish, meaning lamb, is used 29 times in the book of Revelation. 28 of those times, it refers exclusively to the Lord Jesus Christ.
Okay.
This 29th instance is the only time it describes the false religious beast.
So it is a deliberate, grotesque caricature. It looks like a lamb to gain access to the flock. It wears the vestments. It uses the religious language. But when it opens its mouth, it speaks the syntax of the devil, promoting imperial violence and slaughter.
To understand this, we look at the historical context. John is writing this from the penal colony on the island of Patmos under the Roman Emperor Domitian.
So under intense persecution.
Yes, he is unmasking the imperial cult. The imperial cult was the state religion that demanded citizens declare Caesar as Lord just to participate in basic society.
That economic conscription is represented by the mark of the beast, right?
Yeah?
The idea that you could not buy or sell in the marketplace unless you submitted to the state's religious idolatry and burned a pinch of incense to the emperor.
Yes, that is the connection. And the author of our source text applies this framework directly to the Moscow Patriarchate's current actions.
Wow. Yeah.
By endorsing the slaughter of Ukrainian citizens and functioning as a theological architect for the invasion, the hierarchy acts as the false prophet. It forfeits its spiritual immunity.
Because it is not doing church work anymore.
Right. It is no longer performing the work of the gospel. It is performing the work of the dragon, facilitating imperial slaughter.
The source text brings in the Westminster Confession of Faith here, specifically chapters 23 and 25, to clarify these boundaries. What do those chapters add to the equation?
Chapter 23 outlines the strict boundaries of the civil magistrate. It says the magistrate must not assume the administration of the word or the sacraments.
Meaning the government cannot preach sermons, define doctrine, or offer communion.
Exactly. But it adds that the magistrate absolutely possesses an obligation to suppress treason and sabotage.
And chapter 25.
Chapter 25 declares that the Lord Jesus Christ is the sole head of the church, meaning any secular state or any rogue patriarch acting on behalf of a state that tries to usurp that headship commits sacrilege.
This leaves us with an incredibly difficult reality on the ground. The state must use the short sword to stop the dragon, but the dragon is wearing a lamb's fleece.
Yes, that is the perfect way to phrase it.
If the state decides it has the right to shut down a church administrative body, they are suddenly acting very close to a spiritual authority. How on earth does a secular judge practically tell the difference between a legitimate religious dispute and a national security threat in a modern courtroom?
Well, that courtroom reality is unfolding right now in Ukraine. The historical ties, the theological claims, and the modern security threats are all colliding in the judicial system.
It has to be a logistical nightmare.
It is. The government is actively trying to identify the hostile actors among peaceful worshipers, and it is a massive logistical and legal challenge.
We really need to examine the institutional web in Ukraine to understand just how complicated this is. The Orthodox landscape there is incredibly intricate.
Very complex.
I want to break down the timeline. In 2018 and 2019, there was a major ecclesiastical split. What happened?
So figures like Filaret Denisenko led long-standing efforts that finally culminated in the creation of a new unified body called the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, or OCU.
Okay, the OCU.
Right. This new body received official recognition of autocephaly from Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople, who holds a position of primacy in the wider Orthodox world.
I have to pause you there. Autocephaly. That is a heavy theological term. What does that mean for, say, a grandmother walking into a church on Sunday morning?
Autocephaly literally means self-headed. It means that a national church is entirely independent and self-governing.
So they are not taking orders from abroad.
No. They elect their own leader, they manage their own affairs, and they are not subordinate to any bishop in another country. For the grandmother in the pew, it means her church is recognized globally as a legitimate, independent body, not a branch office of Moscow.
That recognition was a massive shift. I mean, before Russian tanks ever crossed the border in 2022 for the full-scale invasion, the religious front was already wide open.
Oh, absolutely.
Moscow treated this recognition of the OCU as an invasion of its canonical territory. They actually severed ties with Constantinople over it.
Yeah, they were furious. Then you have the other major body, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, or UOC.
Okay, so OCU is the independent one, UOC is the older one.
Right. Historically, the UOC has been structurally tied to the Moscow Patriarchate, but their status became very ambiguous after the full-scale invasion began.
Right. When missiles started hitting Kiev, the UOC held a council in May 2022. They declared independence from Moscow, they changed their statutes, but it seems like nobody was entirely satisfied with that declaration. Why is their status still debated?
Well, the UOC repeatedly condemned the war and announced steps to secure full autonomy. They stopped commemorating Patriarch Kirill in their liturgy.
Which is a big deal in the Orthodox world.
It is a huge deal, but the Ukrainian state's religious authority, DES, later analyzed those statutory changes and found them insufficient.
Why? What was missing?
Ukrainian officials argue that there are still remaining canonical, documentary, or structural links to Moscow hidden in the paperwork.
Okay, so it is a paperwork issue, but a very serious one.
Yeah. Meanwhile, UOC leaders argue they have separated in practice, they are enduring the same bombardments as everyone else, and they should not be punished just because Moscow unilaterally continues to claim authority over them.
In the middle of this fierce canonical debate, the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, has taken intense physical action. Human Rights Watch reports that since the full-scale invasion, the state initiated over 100 criminal proceedings against clergy, mostly affiliated with the UOC.
And the charges in these proceedings are severe. They include treason, collaborationism, storing weapons for sabotage, and actively passing artillery coordinates to Russian forces.
I mean, if a priest is actually passing coordinates to artillery units, that is clearly outside the forum internum.
Absolutely. When individuals within an ecclesiastical organization cross the line into active military collaboration, they abandon the protection of the sanctuary entirely.
They become combatants.
Yes, they expose themselves directly to the edge of the state's sword. They are no longer acting as ministers, they are acting as combatants.
The source material highlights a specific high-profile court case.
Yeah.
The Kyiv Metropolis case, number 855-1125. DS publicly announced proceedings to terminate the legal status of the Kyiv Metropolis, which is the governing center of the UOC. And this brings up massive property disputes over state-owned monasteries and lavras, which are these ancient cave monastery complexes.
And these properties are not merely buildings. I mean, they are places of deep historical memory, cultural heritage, and national identity for Ukraine.
They are priceless.
The state argues that public national property cannot remain under the influence or administration of an aggressor's religious arm. However, the judicial system is showing notable restraint in how it handles this.
How so? What is the court doing?
In December 2025, DSS filed an appeal seeking to arrest the property and accounts of the Kyiv Metropolis immediately, while the termination case was still proceeding.
They wanted to lock down the assets up front.
Yes, exactly. But the Supreme Court refused that appeal.
Let me try another analogy here, maybe a bit messy, but let's see if it works.
Go for it.
Imagine a landlord, which is the state in this scenario, accuses a tenant of running an illicit, dangerous operation out of their building. The landlord might want to seize the property, freeze the bank accounts, and change the locks immediately to stop the threat.
Right, just shut it down today.
But the Supreme Court hit the brakes and said, no, we have to let the legal process play out, hear the evidence, and issue a final ruling before we start seizing assets.
That is a very helpful way to look at it. It demonstrates that the law is subject to judicial process, not arbitrary administrative fiat. The courts are demanding evidence and procedural fairness.
This friction over property, proof, and legal process is drawing intense scrutiny from international observers. They fear the state might be moving from surgical precision, targeting actual spies, to blunt force, targeting anyone with a wrong label.
Which is a valid concern.
We need to neutrally analyze the criticisms coming from human rights organizations regarding religious liberty because they are raising alarms.
Human Rights Watch and Forum 18, which monitors religious freedom, have issued severe warnings. They argue that the 2024 law is overly broad.
Okay.
They are concerned it gives the state expanded authority to restrict communities based on presumed affiliation rather than specific proven guilt.
They highlight the danger of collective punishment.
Yes. If the state's rhetoric or actions encourage local mobs or aggressive activists to illegally seize church buildings or to humiliate and harass peaceful worshipers, the moral credibility of the state is ruined.
That makes total sense.
A nation fighting to defend its freedom against tyranny should not import the invader's contempt for the human conscience. Due process is not some annoying legal technicality. It is a moral necessity for a free society.
I understand the human rights concerns completely. But the sources also introduce a massive contrast that we really cannot ignore. We have the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCRF, and they released a 2025 update regarding Russia's actions in occupied Ukrainian territories. What does that report say?
The contrast is staggering. While international observers debate the nuances of Ukraine's legal process, Russian de facto authorities in the occupied areas have enacted severe, absolute bans and widespread violence against non-Moscow groups.
What kind of violence are we talking about here?
The report details the persecution of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Ukrainian Greek Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Protestant groups like Baptists, Pentecostals, and Seventh-day Adventists.
Anyone who isn't Moscow aligned.
Right. Russian forces are forcing these communities to transfer their allegiance to the Moscow Patriarchate. They have disappeared pastors, tortured religious leaders, and hundreds of houses of worship have been confiscated or destroyed. It is a systematic eradication of religious diversity.
The expert analysis in our source text introduces a concept to balance all of this, and they call it principled symmetry. How does that apply here?
Principled symmetry argues that justice requires holding both sides to a consistent standard of truth. It means forcefully condemning Russia's total, brutal religious suppression in the occupied territories, while simultaneously insisting that Ukraine utilize strict, transparent due process in its own legal actions.
So you cannot have selective outrage.
That is the point. The text ties this back to the Westminster Confession, chapter 20, which states a really fundamental principle: God alone is Lord of the conscience.
What does that mean for the state, practically speaking?
It means the state's sword cannot create unity in the spirit. The magistrate cannot regenerate a soul or force a citizen to hold correct theological beliefs.
They cannot arrest you into believing the right thing.
Right. The magistrate's sword is a real instrument of justice, but it is not a sacrament. It cannot govern faith. Therefore, the state must protect the conscience of peaceful UOC worshippers who reject Moscow's war, even while it prosecutes the network's administrative ties.
This makes me wonder about the international reaction. If international bodies are wringing their hands over Ukraine's legislation and demanding perfect, pristine conditions in the middle of the war, but they largely ignore Russia's total ban on minority faiths in the occupied zones, does that selective outrage operate as an unintentional shield for the aggressor?
The author of the reform text forcefully argues that selective outrage is not a moral principle, it is propaganda.
Wow.
Yeah, demanding perfection from the victim while ignoring the absolute tyranny of the invader distorts the reality of the situation. To avoid the trap of collective punishment while still defending the nation against real subversion, the source material outlines a highly specific roadmap. It provides concrete solutions for both the Ukrainian government and the church.
Let's analyze those solutions because they give a practical way out of this mess. The text details 5 specific requirements for a just Ukrainian state policy. First, institutional precision.
So, institutional precision means the law must focus on documented governance, finance, and command structures, not just a general atmosphere of suspicion or an unpopular cultural identity.
They need paper trails.
Yes.
Yeah.
DSS and the courts have to define prohibited subordination strictly in legal and administrative terms that can be proven or disproven with actual evidence.
Second requirement, individualized enforcement.
If clergy commit civil crimes, if they store weapons or pass intelligence, the state must prosecute those specific individuals to the fullest extent of the law.
But only the individual.
Right. But the state must not presume that an entire local parish shares the institutional guilt of a treasonous bishop. Guilt is individual, not collective.
Third, realistic compliance paths for the UOC.
A Ukrainian religious body should not be punished if Moscow refuses to amend its own documents in Russia.
That makes sense. They cannot control what Moscow does.
Exactly. If the Moscow Patriarchate stubbornly lists a Ukrainian bishop as a member of their synod, but that Ukrainian bishop has publicly resigned and severed communication, the Ukrainian body must be judged on its own demonstrable actions, not Moscow's unilateral claims.
Fourth, careful, public, and appealable property measures. The state cannot just seize monasteries in the middle of the night. It has to go through the courts. And fifth, submission to outside legal review by European bodies. Why is that one so critical?
A democratic state at war proves its strength by submitting its actions to international legal scrutiny.
It shows confidence.
Yeah, when Ukraine allows the Venice Commission or the European Court of Human Rights to review its legislation, it shows that it is operating under the rule of law, not arbitrary tyranny. It builds international trust.
The text doesn't just put requirements on the state, though. It outlines required actions for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church itself. The UOC must provide costly clarity. They cannot just say, we are independent now, while leaving canonical ambiguities in their paperwork.
They are required to explicitly and publicly condemn Patriarch Kirill's Ruski Mir holy war ideology.
Publicly.
Yes, very publicly. They must actively discipline any of their own clergy who are found collaborating with Russian forces, rather than quietly transferring them to another parish.
No cover-ups.
Right. And they must publish completely transparent governing documents that prove they have severed all plausible channels of Moscow's control. The text argues that loyalty to Christ forbids loyalty to the Kremlin.
The sources also point out the responsibility of external observers, specifically Protestants who are watching this unfold. We must defend the liberty of conscience for Eastern Orthodox believers consistently.
Yes, we have to be consistent.
If we sit by while a state crushes one peaceful community through broad suspicion today, they could turn around and crush another religious minority tomorrow. But at the same time, we have to refuse narratives that erase the reality of weaponized religion.
Truth must not be selective. We cannot tolerate a hostile intelligence network operating under the guise of religion, but we also cannot support the reckless suppression of a contested church community. It requires immense discernment.
It is like demanding a complete forensic audit of a massive bank, instead of just locking the front doors and firing everyone inside. Doing a forensic audit takes a lot more time. It is painstaking, frustrating work. But it is the only way to catch the actual embezzler without ruining the lives of the innocent tellers who are just trying to do their jobs.
The state must do the hard, grueling work of forensic legal auditing. It cannot give in to the temptation of a quick, sweeping ban.
Think about how wild this entire situation is. We are watching a nation fighting for its physical survival, while simultaneously attempting to untangle a centuries-old fusion of altar and state.
It is a historical moment.
Ukraine is trying to wield the short sword of civil justice against foreign subversion without trampling the sacred sanctuary of the human conscience. It is an incredibly tight rope to walk, and the stakes could not be higher.
And this leaves us with a final thought to mull over, something that extends beyond the immediate legislation and touches on the future of any nation in crisis.
What is that?
If a government successfully utilizes the law to excise a hostile, foreign-controlled church, does it face a secondary, hidden danger? By taking on the authority to decide which religious structures are safe, acceptable, and loyal to the nation, does the state risk accidentally establishing an unquestioning, state-approved patriotism as a new civil theology?
Which brings us right back to where we started. You see that headline flashing on the evening news about a nation banning a church hierarchy. It is never just a simple story of defense versus oppression. The traditional X-ray machine for this kind of crisis is broken. We are looking at a landscape where the lamb and the dragon are constantly trying to switch places, and the state has the terrifying responsibility of figuring out who is who before it swings the sword.